close that one down, and welcome everybody to tonight's great property meet. I am your host, Andrew Roberts, and I have a fabulous panel lined up for you tonight. We have the delightful, delectable Kim Hendle, who is the host of Northampton PPN, a HMO superstar locally here in Northamptonshire. We then have another phenomenal person, Mr. Tony Dand. I've known Tony for so many years. I've lost fingers and toes counting, and he's an awesome, phenomenal photographer as well at our live great property meetings. And then we have the Mr. Fabulous Stephen Mitchell. And Steve Mitchell, he's come here live, hot to trot, quite hot from his fireside chat with Mr. David Clouter tonight. And if you're watching Steve earlier on his fireside chat, you'll notice he's even managed to have time for a wash and a change of outfit for us. So what a brilliant way to start the evening. So before we get going, what I want to do is just briefly share with you some of what we have been doing throughout this summer period while we've been away. And hopefully you can all see the screen there, which is today's topic, the new world of HMOs. Having suffered and gone through that painful lockdown period, lots of landlords have suffered with a lot of problems, from voids to non-payment of rents to COVID-safe cleaning of premises on their exits. And tonight, the panel of three esteemed experts are going to share with you their view on how they are coping, growing, expanding and changing and diversifying their portfolios. Now, you're watching this hopefully on our live YouTube channel. Here's a snapshot of some of the videos that we have lined up for you on there. There is nearly 200 videos for you to view, all sorts of videos from the great property crash, should I buy now, should I buy later. We've got interviews with qualified electricians, debunking the myths of EICR reports. So many landlords had complained to Property 118 that there was problems with them with their EICR reports. That's the electrical inspection condition reports, which became mandatory from the 1st of June. And electricians were sometimes seeing it as a field day to print money. Well, Bill is a qualified electrician, a NAPIT qualified electrician, and produced this video, which has had many hundreds of views. I think there's about 700 views on that video in the space of 2-3 weeks now. So if you are suffering with that or you want to learn more about it, go and find out by watching that short little video. Again, this is something that a good friend of mine, Mr. David Clouter, and myself, we analysed and calculated the costs of buying now or waiting till prices potentially fall, because everybody is predicting a price fall. So that's an interesting little video that we recorded a week or so ago. And during the summer period, when we've all been resting back, we've had a phenomenal amount of planning changes. So the planning expert Linda Wright, a planning consultant and ex-town planner, has been recording a series of videos with myself into the office to residential permitted development changes, the planning white paper that was launched in August, adding 2 floors onto a building, demolishing and rebuilding buildings, the changes to use classes, and busting some of that planning jargon for you. And finally, one of the things that no landlord likes to do is pay tax. And I know Tony and I have spoken on this in the past. How do we pay less property tax? And we've got a video there which has certainly had around 4,000 views on it since it was recorded earlier this year. And finally, we also have one of our own, Mr. Tony Dand, who recorded a famous video on how he beat the VOA on council tax banding. They'd rebanded his HMO into band A, and he took them to the land tribunal and subsequently won that appeal. So there's a video there explaining all about that, and Tony is on with us tonight to share something completely different on HMOs. So what I shall do without further ado is get down into some details here, because we've got a fabulous Kim Hendle. Now, Kim, she's been host of Progressive Property Network. Is it 2 years now, or is it a year and a bit of lockdown?
No, it would have been 2 years in June.
Yeah.
Actually, but unfortunately, we weren't able to celebrate it. But we'll postpone it till another day. So any excuse for a party.
It'll be a bigger and better party, because you'll have saved up more budget for it, won't you?
Yeah, of course.
But no, you seriously there, you're a fantastic host, and you have a great little community down there at PPN Northampton. Do you have a meeting scheduled online for tomorrow night? Because the COVID rules mean that we can only gather in groups of 6, which is hardly a networking meeting.
Well, I haven't, simply for the fact that this sort of COVID lockdown has given us some great opportunities to be able to visit huge numbers of other property meetings that we wouldn't have gone to because of location, for example. So whilst we have these opportunities, I think it's great to be able to advertise other ones and get people to go along to those, virtually, of course, and see what other people are doing, and get to see some of the bigger speakers and different topics that they wouldn't perhaps get to see at Northampton. As I said, we've got within the PPN community some great ones. Steve hosts a really good one. So I'd much rather encourage people now to be able to go along and get involved in those, rather than worry about just what's happening in Northampton, because we also have our own little a subset of PPN Northampton, which is property and poppadoms, of course.
Of course, and that's a brilliant event that Matt hosts, isn't it, Matthew?
It is, yeah.
Yes. Superb. So what we're saying is you're a brilliant host. You've been invested in HMOs for a couple of years now.
Actually, we picked the keys up to our first HMO 3 years in March.
3 years in March now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I believe that our panel's quite a special panel to you as well, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, there's I've had sort of guidance and conversations when Tony and I have been sat on the back row at your meetings, and we've sort of chatted about HMOs and things. Steve I've known for a couple of years now, because he was our mentor at VIP. So every time I had any problems and concerns, I'd pick the phone up and go, Steve, help. And he was there to support us. So, all his processes he gave to us, which have been very useful. And because of getting to know Steve and knowing his standards, Steve and Courtney now manage my HMOs in Northampton for me.
Oh, brilliant. What a small world. What a small world.
Yeah, so, some people might say it's a bit incestuous, but
yeah,
it's not necessarily that way. But because I know Steve's standards,
yes,
and that's how I would want my HMOs run and managed. So it makes perfect sense.
Well, that's really good that you know how he manages them, and we're going to hear from Steve later this evening. And Steve is going to share that story, share the future of HMOs, but it's a story worth staying on board for, because as you found out, he's an invaluable resource for you.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as we're sort of going on here, just a quick pickup. We've got some hellos, and, it's fantastic to see the panel. Hope we're all keeping well from Nata. Anil says hi to us all from the team. Neil saying hello as well. So we've got a few hellos. If anybody else can hear us, Sarah Watt is going, property and Poppadom's got to mention. Woo! Well done, Sarah. Thank you. Yes, Paula Baines is on and says she's made it now. So everybody's jumping on and joining us tonight for this New World HMO special. So briefly before we kick off with your talk, let's hop over to Tony. And if you want to drop some comments for the panel in the box, and if you have questions for the panel, please type them in there, and we will do all of those in the Q&A session. My goodness, that's a large mug there, Kim, that is.
It's going to keep me going for a couple of hours.
It has indeed, it has indeed. So, but what we'll do, we'll now welcome Tony to the stage. And Tony, I mean, I've known you probably 8, possibly more years. You've been a HMO landlord for 20 plus years. And I know you don't look old enough, Tony. I know you don't look old enough, but it's one of them things that I'm sitting there saying, Tony's a fantastic guy. He champions the HMO cause and even shares his wins, such as that with the VOA, with everybody. So if you've got questions about how we beat the HMO room banding, by all means, pop your questions in the chat box. But Tony's got a different talk for us tonight, or watch the video. So how are you keeping today, Tony?
I'm keeping very well, Andrew.
Excellent. Excellent. So what's been happening during your summer period? Have you been busy developing new businesses or something, or?
I've started a new business relating to HMOs and it coming about because of the COVID. It's so important now having security and safety within your HMOs, and I'll introduce a little bit more about that in the talk.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I won't burst that bubble, but what we will do is briefly move on to Steve. Now, Steve, I mean, you've had a busy day. I was watching you on a Facebook Live with Mr. David Clouter earlier, the fireside chat on a Monday night, live from your log cabin there. And now you're here, washed, shaved, changed, fresh as a daisy, and still smiling after that. I mean, your cheeks must be hurting by now.
Yeah, sometimes I feel a bit like a hamster. You know, when a hamster have got like the things in the side, just through. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we're a friend of mine does a post called "Sunshine in Dark Times," which is all about COVID, and you got to smile through it, haven't you? At the end of the day, so yeah, I'm still smiling, and I love doing my sessions with David. He's such a knowledgeable and giving individual that I'm very privileged to do that with him, and also I'm very privileged to be with you guys tonight. So thank you very much for having me on.
Well, I believe you also run a phenomenal resource as well, which I'm just sharing to screen for everybody, which is the HMO Experience podcast. Not only do you have a podcast, but there's several downloadable documents there that people can download. Download the 11 steps to running successful HMOs, finding your first HMO, and the ultimate guide to HMO funding. I mean, what a fabulous resource, Steve.
Thank you very much. It's something that my co-host Matt Harris and Jamie Medill decided that we wanted to do, because sort of collectively we've probably got almost as many years as Tony, perhaps. Maybe not individually, but collectively. But yeah, it's just our view on HMOs, how they should be run. I mean, just as one example, we don't call our the people that stay in our properties tenants. We call them customers, just simply because it's having a slightly different sort of mindset to the people that you're providing amazing and excellent accommodation services to. So it's what we're trying to do is sort of get that message out and help to promote higher standards within the HMO sector.
Yes. Well, I'm a great believer myself in the word customer rather than tenant, because it's about the service you provide and the mindset. And I think that's a real attribute to what you do. So just before we get going with Kim, so I shall stop sharing that. And if you haven't already, The URL's at the top, the hmoexperience.co.uk, and it's on the resources page. Hit the subscribe now button. There's some fantastic podcasts. I believe you just uploaded one from a good friend of ours, David Clouter, as well today. So I haven't had time to watch it, mind you. But,
yeah, we had a lot of fun recording that, and not that it's in the final version. I'm sure David's going to be majorly disappointed. But on the first take that we did for it, the camera actually fell over, so that was a bit of a faux pas. But we had a really good fun time recording that session.
Excellent. Well, we will wait to watch that one with bated breath. And before we start with Kim, I just wanted to say a quick hello to Sarah, who I think I've mentioned is applauding Kim for the poppadoms and property mention there. We've got Paula Baines, who's joining us tonight, Lucky Akinola. Irma's saying hi to Kim with a wave. So there you go. Lucky's joined us as well. Anil Patel has already started firing questions ready for the illustrious panel to answer. He also mentioned, Tony, you seem to have a new hairstyle. So we'll probably cover that when we get on to yourself. So I'm just going to quickly stop that screen share, and I'd like to welcome Kim to share with us her story about why she's expanding her portfolio during lockdown, the challenges this has brought, and what a whoppingly good HMO it is, having had the very lucky opportunity to go and visit it. I think it was a day or two after you'd picked up the keys.
Yeah,
brilliant. Can we all have a massive round of applause for Kim Hendle, please? Woo.
Thank you guys for the massive round of applause. Right, a little bit about me to start with, I suppose. It's I went to progressive property after having worked in a corporate business for more years than I care to remember. And I finally got the opportunity to take some money off their hands and skip my way out of the door. So I was very happy about that. And I was looking at, what do I do next? And I did start looking, back on the jobs market, thinking I could go back into doing what I've always done, which I enjoyed doing, or I could take the opportunity to do something that I've always been interested in, and that was property. So as I had this opportunity, I went along to a multiple streams of property income event, and I took my nephew. And at the time, he was just over 21 years old. And he sat there at the back of the room with his arms folded, thinking, this can't be true. It's, never right. People don't make that kind of money, all those kind of things that, you do feel when you go to these events, because you just hear so many people with good stories about how property has changed their lives. Well, by the end of it, he was putting his hands up and buying every single course that he could with my credit card. But that's beside the point. So we joined VIP and went along to masterclass. And considering that the only property knowledge that we had between us was me buying my own residential home. So we went to VIP and we met Steve, and in the meantime we then bought the first property, which was advertised as a 3-bed mid-terrace property, which we, for our first project, converted into an 8-bed all-en-suite HMO. So considering we'd had no real experience in any way, shape or form, as Steve will, can testify because he saw it, this is what we developed. We finished our second one in last December, and then started to go full ahead with the latest project, which we started to buy before COVID hit. And I actually had the valuer come round on the 17th of March So we just managed to get her in through the door to do the evaluation before we were all into lockdown. Lockdown, yeah, caused, you know, a lot of problems, which you expect. The people that we were talking to initially at the brokers weren't actually the people who were there doing the job as we progressed through lockdown. And the people at the bridging company, people doing the job, weren't the people that had all the discussions with my people at the brokers. So there was a lot of, you know, information that hadn't been passed down the line, and you know, a lot of people working from home and in isolation. It was very difficult for them because they didn't have the files, they didn't have the communication that, you know, we'd had with everybody. They couldn't sort of like pop their head over the top of the computer and ask questions of their teammates. You know, what should I do in this kind of situation? So it took an enormous amount of time, which, you know, we all understand that during this strange situation, this is what was going to happen. You know, it's the way it was. And, you know, and you allow a lot of leeway because, you know, people are working in a completely different way. You know, life was strange for everybody at that point in time. But because of not all the information being passed down, you had people asking lots of stupid questions of the valuer giving answers to the stupid question, and then they'd fire that, you know, that answer back at us to say, well, answer this. But you're asking a question actually that bears no resemblance. What all we're doing is buying from you a 9-bed property. You know, bricks and mortar, that's all we're buying from you at this moment in time to purchase it. You know, it's not an HMO. It hasn't been an HMO for 18 months. They stopped using it. It's just bricks and mortar, 9-bed property. But the conversations that we had, you know, between them and the brokers. So I'd speak to the broker. The broker didn't know the story because that particular broker hadn't been involved in the original conversations. So I'm having to bring them up to speed for them to go to have a conversation with Octane. So it was, forget that I mentioned that. So it's, you know, the process was long, laborious, drawn out, and very, very painful. In as much as the fact that it actually cost me, in the end, 21 grand for my solicitor's fees just to purchase this property, which I don't know about you, it's a lot of money, especially when you're, you know, excluding all the other bits and pieces that it also cost me. You know, that the asset is still there and the money that we've paid out is still there in the property, because I now own 45% of the property because they only funded 55% of it. But, you know, that's all beside the point. But I said COVID had a huge impact on everybody, working from home, the amount of time it took to communicate between the different people. And I said, you had to go with the flow and keep in, you know, bear in mind that at the end of the day, you were going to have an asset that was going to pay you back, or certainly will pay Tom back for the next 40 odd years. So, you know, keeping the long game in mind, because there were a number of times I, you know, wanted to shout at people and, you know, rip their arms off and beat them to death with a soggy end and, you know, those kind of things. But you had to keep keeping it in mind that we were there for the long haul. You know, with HMOs, when you're buying and owning them, you know, it's not a quick process. You know, you're buying this as a long-term asset. doesn't really matter what the value of the asset is greatly. You're looking at it being an income for, you know, every month for however many years. So that's the most important piece as far as we were concerned. So we finally got the keys and we've started to work on it. And it will become an 11-bed HMO, because whilst we were trying to buy it, it took that long. We actually managed to gain planning permission to uplift it from a 9-bed to an 11-bed and 2 kitchens. So, you know, it's worked to our advantage because we're able to buy the property and get the planning permission at the same time. So my clock didn't start to count down on the finance side of things. And then I had, you know, the rush of trying to get the planning permission in. So, you know, it worked out well because we got those 2 at the same time. So now we can fire away and get on with doing the job. Conversely, I mean, yeah, that's my horror story, but I know a number of other people in the Northampton area that have been able to purchase HMOs and properties quite easily, you know, in the latter stages of lockdown where, you know, it probably wasn't so fraught, and people had relaxed a little bit more. So they've bought properties, doing them up, you know. Sarah Watt, for one example, she's turning her 5-bed HMO around in 28 days. Yeah, she's not doing the same kind of major refurb that I'm doing, but to be able to buy it, yeah, and do a really, really good job with it and get it out on the market in 28 days is pretty phenomenal. Sharon O, who's also got an HMO that she's just about to launch, as her and her husband have done a fantastic job of being able to big refurb on that one, get that one done and through, and, you know, offering really, really wonderful rooms. Yeah, they're more than rooms, they are fantastic. But, you know, the standard of properties that are being offered in Northampton are, you know, pretty impressive these days, really good.
That's pretty impressive. I mean, you've had a roller coaster of a journey there, and comments coming in, Kim. You know, Anil says, Kim, excellent, very positive mental attitude. We've got some questions coming through, which we'll do in the Q&A session after the other 2 speakers. Sarah's saying, thanks, Kim, for the mention. So there's lots of comments coming through here from everybody. And if you've got more comments for Kim, or, you know, compliments for her, because I know I was very, very fortunate to have a sneak preview of it last week. And what a monster of a building. A monster, by that I mean big building, not sort of ugly or whatever.
Well, it's not pretty, but, you know.
Yeah. So, no, brilliant. It will be pretty. You're about to grow a swan, is how I would describe it. It's going to be a swan. Lucky is saying congratulations to you, and Sarah's also commenting, Sharon and Ashley are absolutely killing it with their latest projects as well. Yeah. So there's a lot been going on, despite the fact that we're in a lockdown situation. A lot has been going on. You've certainly had a few things thrown at you. But what I want to do is just check in with Tony at this point and sort of follow up on something very different that Tony's been doing with HMOs. And I think it really caught my eye as to what Tony's been doing. And I'd like to sort of, well, I'd like Tony to share that rather than me share it. But Tony, I've known him 8-10 years, fantastic guy, really, really caring, passionate person, loves the business of HMOs, and really sets a bit of a trend with what he does. And you don't just run your own HMOs, you do manage them for other people. And you've got a a good double-digit size portfolio, and you've got some rent-to-rents there as well that you take on as well. So, Tony, do you want to share with us what it is that you have been doing with HMOs during this lockdown window? Because I was quite impressed.
Yeah, of course. Let me introduce myself to everyone first of all, people who don't know me. My name's Tony, and I've been self-employed all my life. And about 20 years ago, I thought to myself, am I going to carry on working for myself the rest of my life, or I need to get a second income? And I decided to move into property to get the second income, and it was purely for cash flow. And in the first couple of years, I bought a couple of single lets. And then somebody said to me, have you ever thought about a HMO? And I had to think about it. And to me, a HMO is 5 units in the same property. So I opened my first HMO in Corby. It worked well. I then opened a second and third one, and I've slowly progressed over the years to the portfolio I have now. Now, tonight's talk is about COVID and how it's affected us. And I'll tell you a little story about how it affected me right at the start. One of the things I do is I love traveling. So back in March, I was in East Asia. I flew out there on the 12th of March, and suddenly lockdown started. But it started between countries and traveling back. So the 2-week trip to Thailand and Cambodia worked a few more weeks, simply because I couldn't fly back. Airlines were shut, borders were shut, and I was stuck obviously the other side of the world. But for me, what Steve said earlier is about not being tenants to being customers. And so the first thing I did when I got back to this country was write letters to all my tenants and go and meet them in the HMOs and speak to them about what their situation was. Because unless you understand what the situation is, you can't help people. Some of them were self-employed and needed to claim the bounce back loans or get money in from there. Some of them simply couldn't work. I had taxi drivers who obviously couldn't go to work. And it's just keeping that communication. And I think whether you have a HMO, you do single lets, it's so important to have that communication with your tenants, especially going forward the next 6 months. A lot of people are going to be losing their jobs, or the situations are changing. So it's very important you as a landlord have that communication with your tenants and find out what the situation is. So one of the things I've looked at, and I'm doing it with my daughter, is how can we make our HMOs safe? Because ultimately you've got a group of people sharing the same facilities, sharing the same bathrooms and kitchens. What can you do to make it as safe as possible? So I've come up with 6 ideas which we as landlords can put into place in HMOs, which to try and make it as safe as possible for them. The first thing I've put up is signs in all the kitchens. If you go on to the Northampton, I know Northamptonshire do it, they have letters which you can actually download and put up in different languages, which explains what COVID is, what the symptoms are, and most importantly, if you have symptoms, where to go to get help. We've all got Eastern Europeans in our HMOs. I think every HMO's got Eastern Europeans, which isn't their first language. So having communication in their own language is so important for them. So get those posters, put them up, let them know the information. The second thing is I brought a few different rules in within my HMOs. First thing is no visitors at all. You can't have strangers coming into the house. I've also spoke to them about when they do shared facilities in the kitchen and bathroom, and almost work a rota out to when to use the kitchen to avoid people using it at the same time. With the kitchens itself, to help them, I've gone out and I've bought stuff like this, very simple. Cost £2 from Lidl's, And then you just suggest them before you use the kitchen, you wipe it down. Once you finish, you wipe it down again, and that way you keep it as clean as possible. Just go through my list. Stagger times. Also encourage them to air the property as much as possible. One thing is with this virus, it loves indoors. So please encourage your tenants to open doors, open windows, let fresh air in. But one of the most things which Andrew is alluding to is we've started this company, and we call it a cleaning company, COVID Clean. It's basically we go in every week and we make sure all the high use surfaces are clean. And if you have HMOs yourself, it's something you really need to think about, is having a cleaner going on a weekly basis, wiping the light sockets, wiping the banisters, the door handles, because that is where the virus is going to move from one to the other. So it's very, very important to think about them things, to get people in to clean them, to look after them for you. And also being a HMO landlord, what we offer as well as a cleaning service is eyes and ears within a property, because you may not want to go there on a weekly basis, but if the cleaner's there or we're in there, we can communicate back. What I've found over years of running HMOs is very easy for a HMO to drop down in standards very quickly. And you don't realise it until it gets too late. So by going in every week, and this is how I do it with my HMOs, I'm there every week, I assess what's happening, I talk to the tenants, you get two-way communication, you can hear when there's any problems, and you can see where problems may be arising. So it's very important to have that communication. And this is, if anybody's a landlord, or especially a HMO, it's so important keeping that communication with them. And going forward in the next 6 months, I think it's vital that you keep that communication. People will be losing jobs. You need to let them know what is out there to help them support this housing benefit, this universal credit, and help them to claim it if that's the scenario. You've got to be like a friend to them and also a helper. You need to know the system and be there for them, because it's going to be stressful for them losing their work. They'll be worried about the houses. The current situation is, as we know, we can't evict tenants, so we need to work with them and help them as much as possible. So that covers roughly what I was going to talk about tonight. Any questions, obviously, write them down. I can answer them later on for you.
Fantastic, Tony. And I believe you were also, I mean, there's probably also, should I say, questions for you coming in on the council tax band A.
Yeah.
That you, well, the video that you recorded and Property 118 shared widely for you had many thousands of views on it, and it is a very popular video that is a very topical subject, because nobody wants a band A HMO if they can avoid it. So there's probably some great questions to come in there from you. But thank you. I mean, if anybody's got questions, I mean, I think there were some great tips in preparing for your, or preparing in case the economy should head south very quickly, to help your tenants with finding universal credit or whichever benefits they might be eligible for, because it keeps your cash flow running smooth and tickety-boo and avoids you hitting a speed bump. So I think there's some great tips there, and perhaps we'll get you on in a future session and share some of those with us.
Yeah.
Steve, we've left the best till last, have we? Or is it they've set a bar and you're now going to find it really hard to reach that bar? What do you think, Steve?
I think it's probably the latter, Andrew, to be honest with you. and the reason why I think it's the latter is because I don't normally come out and do talks like this. As I mentioned earlier, my business partner, Jamie Medill, would normally be doing sort of the talks and the things like that. So the fact that I'm sort of coming out with lack of practice probably means that Kim and... sorry, and Andrew, sorry, I've forgotten your Tony, sorry, Tony, has set the bar really high. And as I've just demonstrated, I've failed at the first hurdle.
You're all right, Steve. I tell you what, I'll let you off for a second, just to allow you to compose yourself. I'll just share a screen for you, and perhaps we'll put that there so that everybody can see this fantastic HMO experience podcast that you record with Matt Harris and Jamie Madehill. And you've also got several very useful guides for people to download from there as well. And it's all free of charge, isn't it, Steve?
It is indeed. So if anyone is looking to get into HMOs, or perhaps you have an interest in HMOs, what I'm not saying is that that is the only way to do it, but we just offer perhaps an alternative way of looking at HMOs. And we've worked with a lot of people over the last 3 or 4 years to help them get their HMOs up and running. We predominantly sort of work in Bedfordshire and just up into Northampton. So if anyone is interested in having a separate conversation about setting up their HMOs, or if they've got HMOs and having any challenges, then more than happy to have a discussion. But also check us out on the HMO Experience podcast. And if I might just do one other little plug, we're actually launching a book called The HMO Blueprint, which will be released through Amazon at a later date. And if you subscribe to the HMO Experience podcast, then we will sort of keep you updated with that as well.
Brilliant. Well, I believe you were also Kim's mentor as well. So you actually saw Kim from when she was taking her first baby steps into HMOs, right the way through to an aggressively expanding HMO landlord during lockdowns.
That's absolutely right. And I think one of the things I love about Kim is that she's got very little fear and taking on that monster of the project. And I remember going up to Northampton and spending a bit of time in that property. And we all have a vision or an image of what a 3-bed mid-terrace property looks like. This was nothing like the average 3-bed mid-terrace property, because it had a massive extension out the back. And I think Kim has done a wonderful job, not only on that, but also on the other projects that she has successfully done. And in terms of sort of moving those projects forward, yeah, it's not been easy for Kim, and for a lot of us, we have challenges with getting our HMOs up and running. But at the end of the day, it comes down to persistence and determination and having a good team around you. And that's one of the most important things that us as HMO operators and owners have to have. Is a good team around you, so that you're not sort of doing it all by yourself. And if you can build that team, then certainly the journey becomes a lot easier.
Well, that's really important, is having a good team around you. And it was one of the things which I've learnt during this lockdown window, when my primary builder, as Kim will sort of tell you, I picked the phone up and said, who do you know who? My primary builder suffers with COPD and unfortunately had to self-isolate, pulling himself off our project that we just started. So we had to quickly reassemble a secondary team, which was not our original aim, but at the end of the day, it got us through. So, I mean, what pearls of wisdom can you share with people, Steve, about the future of HMOs and where it's going? You've got a HMO Blueprint book, obviously, which we'll direct people to once that gets published.
Yeah, so I think the future of HMO, this is just sort of my thoughts and views. But perhaps for people who don't know me, I'll just introduce myself. So my name is Steve Mitchell. I worked a bit like Kim in corporate. My role was in finance, and predominantly I looked at risk and asset management. So that's what the kind of position that I take when I look at HMO investments. But I didn't start with HMO investments. A bit like yourself and Tony, started with some buy-to-lets. up in Liverpool, which was my goldmine area. And I started to work with a JV partner up there who knew the local area a lot better than I did. And we found this end terrace 1970s property that came on the market, bought it for £49,000. And he said, I've got a really good idea. I said, what's that, Danny? He said, what we should do is leverage the council's scheme, whereby if you put 2 people on support payments into that property, and provided they've got a room plus 1 other room that they can have exclusive use to, then you can start to claim the 1-bedroom rate. So the 1-bedroom rate up in Liverpool was £350. So that means we could claim sort of 700 quid. Whereas the traditional sort of buy-to-let price that you would get was around about sort of 500, 550. So I thought, well, this is really good. I'm getting an extra couple of hundred quid. What if we put 4 people in there, Danny? Could we sort of like double our money? He said, no, you can't do that, Steve, because that's an HMO. I said, well, what on earth is an HMO? I've never heard of one of those before. So he started to explain what the HMO was. And obviously there's some additional sort of regulations that go around the HMO properties, but nothing too onerous. So we started buying 3-bed properties up in Liverpool and converting them into 5- and 6-bed HMOs. And it was great because the cash flow came through. We weren't getting so much on the capital growth, but from a cash flow perspective, it was amazing. That the mortgages were sort of typically anywhere between sort of £200 and £300, and we were sort of turning over anywhere between sort of £1,200 and £1,800. So it was a good return on our investment. And we started to do a few of those, but as we've mentioned before, it was in the management that was the issue. So we started to manage them ourselves between Danny and myself. I live in Cambridge or just outside of, so going up to Liverpool isn't really practical. So making sure that you've got a good managing agent, like Tony was saying earlier, who is embracing HMOs, who's operating to the right standards is vitally important. So we started to buy more HMOs. I wanted to do something closer to home. So rent to rent was a relatively new strategy 4 years or so ago. And we started to look at doing HMO management in Bedford. And we quickly grew the company. We made lots of mistakes. One of the things that we had to do very quickly was to systemize how we bought the HMOs on board. So the maximum number of properties that we bought to market at any one time was 4, which from memory was around about 20 odd rooms. So the fact that you can sort of systemize means you can scale, and the fact that means you can scale means that you can get the income in quicker. But as the market started to sort of mature, what we started to see is that there's a lot more competition coming into that space. So we started to ponder, well, what's the future of HMO? And we kind of look at that on 3 different levels. So we look at it from an investment perspective, we look at it from an economic perspective, and we look at it from a social perspective. And I'd just like to say that this is not financial advice, it's not any legal advice, it's just my sort of views and opinions on the HMO market, or where we are today and where it might be sort of going in the future. So from an investment perspective, I think that HMOs clearly are harder than buy-to-lets, but I think they're infinitely easier than serviced accommodation. So it sort of operates in that sort of middle ground. But in terms of returns, I think you get better returns on an HMO than you would on a buy-to-let, but possibly lower than a serviced accommodation. I mean, I'd love to test that theory, but no service accommodation providers are prepared to share their finances with me. So I take it on their word that they get good returns from that service accommodation model. But what HMO represents to me is also diversification of risk, because as I mentioned in my corporate role, I was a risk manager. And what that allows me, that if I've got 1 room empty, I've still got another 5 incomes coming through. If I'm in a buy-to-let, if that 1 income goes, then it's me who's subsidizing the mortgage. So you then start to look at, or ask the question, well, why do HMOs fail? Because I know there's lots of people who have gone into the HMO space. Some people are starting to back out of that, and they've been very public on social media. And I think one of the biggest reasons why HMOs fails is because people either don't understand or they don't do their due diligence properly. And part of that due diligence is around the deal analysis. So one of the things that we make sure that we do in all the deal analysis that we put together for an HMO is that we always include a void provision. And the void provision that we put in is 8%. Now, 8% is a specific number. So you might sort of think, well, why is it 8%? And the reason it's 8% is because it represents 1/12. So we always assume that the property, each room in the property is going to be empty for 1 month of the year. Now, whether it is or whether it isn't really there. But we take that 8% void provision out of our cash flow and we put that into a side account. And that side account has built up over the last 4 years for us, that now we're in a bit of a sticky situation. Rather than having to go and get bounce back loans and COVID loans, we've got a big pile of cash that's sitting in an account that has sort of sustained us going forward. So again, lack of financial knowledge or lack of financial discipline, where perhaps some people who have been bitten by HMOs in the past, having that sort of big lump of cash that you're taking out each month is a good financial discipline, I would argue, that you should have. Obviously, the next element on the investment perspective is who exactly are your customers. And Tony touched on a really great point, is that you've got to have a good understanding of what your customer base needs. And if you don't supply what your customer base needs, then don't be surprised if they go elsewhere, because someone else will. And the other question that comes up quite regularly is, isn't the HMO market saturated? Well, I think you can look at that in two different ways. The way that I prefer to look at that is what we call the cream effect. So the cream will always float to the top. So what do you need to do in order to have that cream effect? And I think there's 3 elements that you have to have in your HMO or in your business in order to have that effect. The first, as Tony has already mentioned, is the quality of the product, and Kim has mentioned also that the standard of HMOs that we see in Bedford, that Kim has seen in Northampton, has increased massively over the last 4 years. And if you're offering the best quality product, then people will come and people will pay, because people are looking for quality. Now, it's all very well having a good quality product, but you've got to have the service that matches. So offering a good service, or I would argue an outstanding service, as Tony has mentioned previously, is the second element to making sure that your HMO thrives in a saturated market. And the third element, to my mind, is that you've got to keep the cost to serve down. So employing things like home automation, we make a massive use out of PIRs and automated lighting, the heating systems, all of these things that you can build into a new build HMO, I would argue is a good investment. But also, if you're looking to do rent to rent as well, you should be looking to see how you can start to reduce your cost to serve, because that ultimately has an impact on your profitability. The next element on the investment side is the Brexit question, and because that's a political element, I'm not even going to go there. So the next element is around COVID, and Tony's given us some great advice on what we should be looking at as operators within our HMOs. But there's a couple of other things that I think are quite important that we need to take into consideration to make sure that we're protecting ourselves against COVID. So one of the most important things that I see is the end of furlough, and we've just passed the 45-day marker, and we're rapidly approaching the 30-day marker, where a lot of companies will have to give notice of consultation to their employees. So understanding who your customers are, whether they're self-employed, whether they're on PAYE, whether they are key workers or whether they're non-key workers, will give you a good indication of potential void or potential non-payment of rent. And I think being prepared for that is vitally important if we want to make sure that our HMOs remain valid investment vehicles. You've obviously got the other question around communal versus non-communal space, and also en-suites we're seeing are much more desirable than non-en-suites. But as Tony has, I think, experienced, there are certain VOA implications potentially if the VOA gets wind of that. So seeing Tony's video and Andrew's video on how he overcame those is a good strategy to mitigate that. Just very quickly on things like economic perspective, my view is that HMOs really fill that space, that in economic tough times, people are looking to save money. And certainly when we're doing our viewings, of which we've done over the last week, we've probably done about 20 to 25 viewings. Saving money is number one on potential applicants list. They're looking for savings in terms of coming out of perhaps 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom flats. They're trading down, and HMOs offer that that sort of accommodation that will fit that marketplace. But also in better times when people want to trade up, you might sort of think, well, people want to move out of HMOs into 1- and 2-bedroom flats. Well, yeah, that's true, but HMOs were never, in my humble opinion, never meant to be sort of permanent accommodation solutions. It's always a transitory accommodation solution. And our job is to try and keep hold of our customers as long as possible. And I'll share some stats from our portfolio in a little bit. And I always come from the perspective that no one, given a choice, would ever want to live in shared accommodation. So you have to ask the question, well, why do they? So if you start to look at what's happening in the marketplace, the market that we serve, which is young professionals, people tend to want to be saving for deposits in order to get onto the property ladder. But unfortunately, trying to sort of save money in this day and age is very challenging for that marketplace. And even when they do start to build up a good pot of savings as a deposit, suddenly COVID comes along, the bank changes all the lending restrictions, and therefore they're sort of back down to square one again of having to find more money to put in a deposit in order to get out of the situation that they're in. So that whole sort of lending environment is changing. That's affecting our target market, which is young professionals, which means that they're having to look at accommodation solutions like HMOs for their accommodation needs. And of course, trying to save for a deposit is a challenge in itself. But when you start to look at the job market is really dependent on mobility. People will go to where the jobs are, and that's more so true now than ever it is. And when I start to look at our company stats, because we do exit interviews or exit discussions with all of our customers, 53% of them leave us because of a job change. 27% leave us because they're moving from an HMO into a flat, and 12% of our customer base is what we call an upgrade. So they've moved from a non-ensuite room into an ensuite room. So again, that sort of 53% of our portfolio just I think sort of goes to further demonstrate the mobility of the job market is first and foremost. And it'd be interesting for anyone watching and listening, if you've got any sort of experiences with your portfolios, it'd be certainly interesting to see if that's sort of mirrored across your properties. But when you start to look at the social perspective, David and I was talking a little bit about this with our fireside chat earlier, the whole changing demographic of that age group. Over the next 10 years, there's going to be around about 500,000 to 600,000 less 20 to 29-year-olds coming into the marketplace who might be looking for HMO accommodation. So that's going to put a pressure on the marketplace just in terms of sort of supply and demand. When you start to look, as I said, look at job security, the employed versus the self-employed, the key worker versus non-key worker, it's going to be very important that when we're filling our HMOs, if you're going for that sort of non-student, non-blue collar market, that you fully understand who your customers are. so that you can understand what the risks that are associated with each of those job types and those employment statuses, so that you can then start to factor in, well, is 8% void enough? Maybe it should be something like 10 or 12 when you're doing your deal analysis. And I think obviously the lack of the general lack of housing in the UK is another issue. Whereas the young people trying to get onto the marketplace have traditionally relied on the bank of mum and dad. The fact that perhaps mum and dad doesn't have that income, now it's becoming the hotel of mum and dad, because you've got 20 and 30-year-olds staying at home. And if the bank of mum and dad pays out, what happens to mum and dad's pension pot? Is that gone? So is there starting to be a change in the way that parents are able to help their children get onto that ladder? And that sort of market, in terms of the 20 to 30-year-old, they're growing up with what's called the shared economy. Everything is now shared. So living in an HMO isn't necessarily going to be something that is alien to that age group. And I can start to see this in our statistics, because when we look at, we go back to 2016, when we look at the number of people that have left us, and then we look at how long they've stayed with us, back in 2016, it was an average of 9.8 months. So that was the duration at which our customers stayed with us. 2020, that's now 18 months. That's an average. So we've got people who are much longer and people obviously who are shorter. But as I look, 2017, it dropped to 8 months. Going to 2018, it went up to 10.4 months. 2019 was 12.6 months. And here we are concurrently in 2020, where the average length of stay that people leave us is 18 months. So I would argue that people are staying in HMOs for longer for the reasons that I've talked before, which is predominantly economic and predominantly social. So when you overlay that on HMOs as an investment, I think it's only a good thing. So in conclusion, I think that HMOs are here to stay, but I think it's going to become a lot more competitive. We're going to be fighting for the best customers. We're going to be trying to keep our customers for as long as possible. And therefore, the watchword going forward, I think, is product quality. And when I say product, we refer to the rooms as our product. But also customer service and customer due diligence is key, because without the customers, we don't get any income. That's kind of our lifeblood. So looking after our customers going forward, and that's what we do at our management AG, which is called Vivoco Lettings and Property Management. That's first and foremost in our mind when we help people like Kim to manage her properties, or when we actually take investments on ourselves. We make sure that the customer is first and foremost in everything that we do that is HMO.
Well, Steve, I mean, I think the key message I'm getting from you there is customer is king, be it Kim or be it what traditionalists would call the tenant. And what I found really interesting was the stats that you're quoting there about how, and it's a sign that you've managed your business very well, because the old saying, what you don't measure, you can't manage, is very true there. And what you're seeing is an uptick in the length of stay. So I think that is a testament to how you run your business. And I can't really add any more than that, other than you're doing a fantastic job. So
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think looking at Kim, she's clapping away there for us as well, telling you that you're doing a great job. At this point, if anybody's got questions, I've been making a note of the various questions that have been coming out. We've had all sorts of comments coming through. I'll read out a few of the comments just before we start moving to the questions. We've got Steve Shellabeer, very informative evening. Irma says, great stats, Steve, love it. Sam Chiara's great resources, Steve. Paula Baines, great content. Niall Kelly says, what a great evening as well. And Lucky, I missed this one off because you'd actually started, Steve, but some great tips there, Tony, from Lucky. And we've got questions that I'll deal with in just a moment. But before I swap over to questions, if you've got questions that you want to put into the questions box, the live chat box, if you can drop them in there. Lucky's just said thanks to you, Steve. That's just popped in the box. There's all sorts of questions coming. What I'd like to do briefly is just mention a little book. Now, this book here, which is the Entrepreneur's Cookbook, it actually launches on the 24th. And I've had a sneak preview of this, and I've been helping a good friend, Shaz Nawaz, sort of analyze the book. And it's brilliant. It is a really well-written book about the 6 stages of business: business strategy and direction, marketing and customers, finance and accounting, changing your mindset, but also changing your personal thinking, getting your work-life balance right, and looking at risk and crisis management, which this year has come to the fore. Now, it's full, it's absolutely ram-packed full of practical advice, and it's going to give you a head start in terms of supercharging your profits. So the book is called The Entrepreneur's Cookbook. It's only available on Amazon, and if you want to dash over to Amazon, this is the link there on Amazon where you can acquire that book. And at $7.99, some of the tips here I've started to deploy already, and they will make a massive impact on your profits. If you don't get your $7.99 back, I'll give you the $7.99. That's all I can say on it. Brilliant book, highly recommend it. Let me just stop plugging a book there, which is a fantastic book, and let's move over to some of the questions. I mean, if I start with a question that came in early on from Anil, Anil was saying, how do you see the HMO market going forwards post-COVID? To all of the panelists. If we start with you first, Kim, what do you see happening to the marketplace? Do you see it changing or staying the same or having to adapt your model?
I don't think that, certainly not in the short term, much is going to change. We still don't have enough houses for everybody. We still have a lot of young people that need to move, you know, to find their jobs. Nothing has changed as regards, you know, COVID impacting that side of things. So, you know, in the short term, there will still be the need for private housing, whether it's HMOs, single lets. You know, we still have people that need and want, you know, good quality housing. So that's my view.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, do you? Well, I'll go to Tony first, and then I'll put my 10 penneth in there. Tony, how do you think the market's changed as a result of COVID, and do you think it will change going forwards? Customer demand.
I think what Steve was saying is so true. You've got to treat your customers, your tenants as customers, and it's getting more and more competitive. So you have to keep raising your game. You have to show your tenants that you care about them, but you also have to produce a product which they want. And it's going to be more and more competitive. So as long as you like to see top of that, your cream at the top, you're going to have your rooms filled. If you don't, that's where you're going to have problems.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, Steve, I mean, obviously you've spoken about this. The specific thing is the market going forwards post-COVID. How do you think it might change there?
I think it will change. But the thing with people is that they've got really short memories, and I think that whilst we are sort of in the mix of it, a lot of people are certainly the feedback that we're getting from viewings is that properties that with shared accommodation in terms of communal space is either vilified or it's required, because that shared space, that communal space, not only is a potential, as Tony mentioned, a breeding ground for COVID, but if you don't have that communal space, what's the alternative? You're stuck in your room, which is as a minimum size, as we all know, is 6.52 square meters. I mean, it's not much bigger than a prison cell. So the other thing that we're picking up on viewings is what's the outside space size, which would have been lovely for today, but looking at next week when it's going to be raining is a thing. So I think one of the things that I see going forward is that the customer is going to be more discerning. I think that the bigger the property you have, I think is an advantage. I think the smaller the property you have could be a challenge going forward. And we are certainly seeing that. If I look at the individual occupancy rates of our sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 bed properties versus our sort of 4-bed properties, well, the occupancy is a lot higher on those bigger properties than it is on the smaller ones. It's not to say that smaller ones don't play a part, but I think just right now in the mix of it, I think people are very conscious about what they're going to be moving into, who they're going to be living with, bearing in mind that a lot of customers come to a new town, a new house, new people, new job. That's a lot of new stuff. And therefore they're going to be wary. But I think that this is a short-lived thing, maybe going into Q1, Q2 of next year. Once we get this vaccine, I think it's then back to some semblance of normality until the next zombie apocalypse comes along.
Yeah. The next zombie apocalypse. That is brilliant, Steve. I love that analogy. I would agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I think going forwards, there might be a customer mindset change a little bit in that they're having to work from home, some of them, which working from a small 6.52 square meter HMO room does make it a little bit of a challenge. So I think those landlords with some of the rooms like Kim has, which are quite large rooms, stand a chance of getting better occupancy rates with lower voids. Despite the risk of the band A, I think those that offer almost semi-self-contained or self-contained facilities will also potentially in the short term win over. However, as investors, what we need to look at is our returns on investments, because it's about the numbers and not going bankrupt trying to provide for this. So that's my short take on it. I've got loads of questions, and more questions have been pouring in while we've been answering that first question. So we might be here till midnight at this rate, but I'll try and pick them up quickly and swiftly for everybody. Irma's asked a great question here. What would you do different with your latest HMO, Kim? Now, as you've all been speaking, I've been making notes of questions, and that was one of my questions. What would you do different? I mean, you've spent 21,000 on legals. You've sort of had the stresses of a lockdown and people disappearing, coming back, and so forth. What would you do different?
Buy it cash. Basically, that would have saved me 21 grand for a start.
Yeah.
You know, I think, and I have fallen foul of this. I'm not very good at going out and what I would classify as schmoozing people. You know, look at me, let me have your money. But I would really encourage people, you know, investors now, to spend as much time building up a bank of contacts, including investors, to be able to do this. We know we have a situation where there are people out there with money, and we have people that are wanting, you know, decent returns for their money. So, you know, being able to purchase this property with cash would have solved an awful lot of problems and a lot of heartache and a lot of grey hairs, which you now can't see because I've had the hair done since. Yeah.
I was going to say, I can't see any grey hairs from here, Kim.
Yeah,
I mean, surely
it's
not
been
grey
done.
hair.
Yeah, been done. So that would be, you know, one of the first things I would change if I could do it all again, and if I could push myself into doing, you know, the right stuff a bit more, then that's what I would do.
Yeah. I think that's great advice, but not everybody has deep pockets of cash. And obviously, if you're raising money from third parties, we have to be conscious and compliant with the FCA regulations there as well, just to sort of add that caveat on to protect you and protect us. But
you just asked me what I would do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Sarah came up with a great one in response. She went, "Really? Did you factor in £21,000 into your original deal for legal costs?"
No.
So does that put you over budget then? From the way you go, no, that must mean you're over budget.
Yeah. But most of that overspend has come out of our money, which we would have put in for the refurb and so on and so forth. So that overspend is still there in the asset itself. I just have to wait now till I remortgage it to be able to release that money back out of that asset. So it's not lost money, it's just been used in a different way than I originally planned.
Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. Very positive way of looking at it. We'll help you bring that in on budget for you as well.
Thank you.
Nina's come up with a great question. She said COVID safety is a serious concern of hers, Tony. I mean, as a landlord, do you recommend bringing in an external firm such as your cleaning company with your daughter? Do you recommend people try and do it themselves? What do you think? I mean, would it be better bringing in a firm because it helps them demonstrate compliance and also mitigate risk for them?
Yeah, I think you need to have a cleaners go around to the property every week. You're never going to get 100% COVID safe. But if you get the right cleaners in to clean all the high risk items, at least you know yourself you've done it. It's like I say, we can never fully eliminate the risk, but having a professional company go in there to clean it on a regular basis, not once every 2 weeks, once a month, every week, at least you make sure that property is clean at that stage.
Yeah, a bit like an MOT. It passed at the moment in time, and hopefully they will be sensible after the cleaners left.
Plus, you need to talk to the tenants. You need to explain why they need to do it, the importance for everyone's safety, not just their own. And having people going around every week, you can soon monitor when things aren't happening as well as they should be. And that's when you can talk to the tenants and remind them
what it is. Yeah. Well, there's a question to all the panelists here. And this question is, how do you provide for people who've been forced to work from home? Now, we all know people who've had to work from home and sit on Zoom calls and the like, Microsoft Teams. Tony, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Steve and then Kim. How do you provide for people working from home?
The most important thing I find on the tenants is having a very fast internet connection. I spoke to Virgin, and now I get commercial broadband via them, which is like hotel standard. And I think that is very, very important. If you're working at home, needs that really good internet connection.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. I mean, Steve, what have you been doing to help your customers work from home, or have you told them they can't work from home?
No, not at all. I mean, if we go back to our sort of core belief, which is what does the customer need, then like Tony, we have invested in the same broadband to make sure that we get the speed. But the speed we found is the one thing, but actually getting what we call the Wi-Fi bubble is another one. So over the last sort of 6 months, we've actually gone out and changed all of the routers over from the standard sort of router that Virgin would normally supply. we now use the Netgear Nighthawk router, which is a lot more powerful, creates a wider bubble, and particularly in larger houses, you've got to make sure that you've got even sort of coverage across that house. And in some instances, it might mean having to put 2 routers in, because at the end of the day, if the customer needs this to work, needs the speed to work from home, and they're paying your income, then you've got to be looking at providing this. And there's a great app that that we use called Wi-Fi Sweet Spot, which you can download onto your phone, hook it up to the router, and it will sort of measure the signal strength as you walk around the house, so that you can see where any dropout spots are, and then just insert an extender into a plug socket, which will then boost it back up again. So that's one thing that we do. The second thing is that some of our customers have asked for like desks and chairs. So we've gone out and invested in those. One of the things that we've found really useful, particularly if you've got sort of smaller rooms, is that buying collapsible desks and collapsible chairs that when they're not in use could be sort of tucked up by the side of a wardrobe or something like that, so that the space doesn't have to be used as a workspace when they don't need to use it as a workspace, but can easily be pulled out should that need be. And in some of the larger houses, where we have what we call the drying room. So there may be a room that isn't sort of quite up to measurement standards or minimum room standards. We would normally use that as a drying room. So we put a whole bunch of sort of areas in there, and it's better to have those clothes drying in that space rather than people's homes. But we've put it to the house and said, well, look, here's a space. How do you want to use it? Do you want to keep it as a drying room, or would you like to use it as a home office? And some of the people said, no, we actually prefer to use it as a home office. It does mean obviously drying clothes, which hasn't been too bad of late outside, but we've then gone and bought some additional desks and chairs so that people can actually use that. Now, one of the things that we didn't consider right at the very beginning, which is an important point that Tony picked up on, is that if different people are using that space, then how does that relate to COVID? So making sure that everyone is clear on what the internal rules, for want of a better expression, in using that space. So we provided anti-bac sanitizers, so they wipe down the chairs, they wipe down the desks, and also they book it. So you haven't got multiple people in there. They can book a slot to go and use that space. It just means that they're getting out of their room and using a different solution. And one final thing is that we've invested a lot more in outside furniture. So whereas previously we wouldn't necessarily have sort of tables and chairs and things like that, even sort of pots and plants. For anyone who knows me, I do a little, or used to do a little thing called Seeds with Steve, which was charting my vegetable growing exploits. And some of our customers was watching it. And so we've helped them started to grow their own potato plants and their own tomato plants. And that's when you start to really get to bond with your customers. And the fact that you bond with your customers and providing them with the facilities they need means that you're going to build that loyalty and keep them for longer.
And obviously that must be some of the things that are helping tick up the from 12 months to 18 month stays as well.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. I mean, Kim, what have you been doing to help your customers, your tenants in their HMOs work from home?
I suppose in a way, I've been quite fortunate in the fact that those people that have had to stay at home to work, their room sizes are decent, and they actually prefer to work within those rooms because some people are dealing with personal information, and so it's difficult to be able to manage it if it's in a more communal space. Others, again, in some HMOs, a lot of people have been key workers and have worked all the way through. And again, that does pose different risks about every time they step outside of the door, go to work, they run the risk of bringing the disease back in, or the virus back in. So again, we put up some house rules, and I've sent them all letters that these are the kind of things that you need to be doing. But there are times when you know, the lunatics are definitely inside the asylum rather than, you know, anybody coming from the outside in, because, you know, not everybody subscribed to the fact that we have a virus out there, you know, so it is difficult, and you can only, you know, hope that people within the house themselves are managing themselves and, you know, perhaps imparting some words of wisdom to others that aren't looking out for the house as a whole.
Yeah, and it's good that there's almost an internal mentor within a house, or somebody who takes the mother position, or
Yeah,
the parental position, shall I say, so as not to be sexist. Great one. A question here for you, Steve. Do you have any views or insights regards HMO hotspots around England? This is from Sam. I think he's looking to work out where should be a sweet spot to invest in HMOs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Sam. I think the one piece of advice I would probably give is that you've really got to do your due diligence. I mean, when I started sort of back in 2013-14, my mentor at the time said that you've got to get under the skin of the place that you want to invest in. And at the time, I had no idea what he meant. So I sort of judged that to be, well, I've got to go and walk the streets. I've got to talk with many people as possible. I've got to go along to the local networking. I've got to meet other HMO investors. And one of the things that I found right from the get-go is that this is probably the most competitive friendly industry that I've ever been in. Everyone wants everyone else to do well. I don't think that there is anyone out there that would sort of hold on to information or processes or ways of working, because everyone wants everyone else to succeed. So when you start to look at the UK, the way that I split it down is that you're either looking at sort of cities or you're looking at what I would call sort of towns. So Bedford I would classify as a town, Liverpool I would classify as a city, and then you've got sort of the rural element. Well, with all the goodwill in the world, I don't think HMOs will work in the rural sort of economy. I'm happy to be shot down and proven wrong, because then I can use that as a case study to say, well, yeah, actually HMOs work everywhere. But I think that if you're looking at where to go, it also depends whether you're going to manage it yourself or whether you're going to get someone else to manage it for you. If you're going to manage it yourself, then I wouldn't want to be more than sort of 45-minute commute away. And the litmus test that I gave myself was that if I got a call at midnight that the house was on fire, where would how far would I go? And Bedford was probably about the furthest I would want to go. Fortunately, Courtney lives between Bedford and Northampton, so we can now get up to Northampton within 10 minutes. But that was something that I sort of posed to myself very early on. And of course, if you're going to get someone to manage it for you, then I would certainly highly recommend that you almost interview them, look to understand how their processes work. Do they understand the HMO management regulations, which for me is a bit like a job description for the HMO manager. So if they have no idea what the HMO regulations are, then I would be giving them a bit of a wide berth. But to answer the question specifically, HMOs can work anywhere. You just need to do your due diligence, Sam, to make sure that the market works. And if you find yourself, or if you're close to areas whereby there is more supply than demand, then don't get put off, because like Tony and Kim have been saying before, and we're working with Sharon in Northampton, the cream does certainly rise to the top. So therefore, you've got to be making sure that you understand what your product criteria is. And within that are things like your interior design. It doesn't have to cost a lot. But it needs to look smart, and it needs to look the concept needs to be attributable to the customer market that you're going for, because not everyone goes for professionals. You might be going for students, in which case there's no way, I doubt Kim would be spending all that money on a big amazing HMO just to have students come in and potentially trash it. So it also depends on the market that you're going for. But if you want to connect offline and want to have an individual chat, I'm more than happy to spend half an hour talking through perhaps some areas that you have in mind. We could do a little Zoom call and maybe do a little bit of due diligence on the way that we do due diligence to see if those areas might be suitable for you. So just connect with us via Andrew, and if we can help, then we more than likely will.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Steve. I mean, while you've been talking, a message has come in from Kathy, and she says she agrees with much of what you say, Steve. Making the most of what you have is key. A covered enclosed patio area becomes a much used and positive extra space for your property. So yeah, I think the audience is agreeing with what's being said there. I've got a nutty little HMO one for Tony this time. Individual banding of rooms. It's a random issue, and you know, what advice can you share for HMO owners to try and avoid it? Now, what I'll do while you're talking, Tony, I'll just share the screen a little bit so that the audience can actually see that particular video thumbnail, which has got a detailed 25-minute case study on it. But Tony, I mean, you tell me how, or share with Sarah how she can avoid an individual banding. What tip have you got?
Well, if you look at the definition of what single banding property is, every single room in every HMO in this country fits the criteria. So we're starting off from that point of view, that in theory and the letter of the law, every HMO room, because it's exclusive, it's non-transident, it's for just that one person, then it should, in theory, be a Band A property. And all I can say is, from my own experience, you have to judge each individually and with the council and the VOA why they've chosen you to be single band. Going forward, and I know it doesn't sound that positive, but in the future, the government needs to get all this money back. It's been given out for furlough and bounce back loans, and it could be something which could become nationwide. So there's no one reason why not them to do single banding, but it's just something to be careful of. It could be something going forward, which they could charge every HMO room for.
Yeah, I mean, the video's got a lot of information and tips there, which is well worth watching. And you also put together a pack that people can download as well. And that contains a lot more information than the video if you really wish to deep dive the subject, doesn't it, Tony?
It does. We could have an hour talk just on single banding, but obviously there's more things we're talking about tonight. But if anybody wants to talk to me directly, speak through Andrew, and I can help answer any questions directly with people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tony. Thank you. I hope Sarah finds that useful and helpful. I mean, I've got a question here from Irma. How do you get your HMO customers at the moment? And has it changed pre-COVID to post-COVID? Tony?
To me, because I'm not trying to boast or anything, but I don't actually advertise for any tenants because I've got such a good reputation with the tenants I've had previously. I get new customers, new tenants through recommendations. And you only get that by being a good landlord and giving them what they want and looking after them. So at present, I haven't got any empty rooms at all throughout my portfolio. And it's not that I've advertised, it's just I'm looking after the tenants I've got and I get it through personal recommendation.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, Steve, how do you get your customers? Has it changed pre-COVID to post-COVID?
Not really. Like
You're going to
Tony,
give the same answer as Tony, aren't you?
Yeah, not quite, because we do have vacancies. We get about 40% of our customer through what we call referral or word of mouth. So again, that's similar to what Tony was saying about the level of service that you have. And certainly when we do exit interviews, we use a satisfaction score called Net Promoter Score, NPS, which is basically, if you don't know what that is, you ask one question, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is highly likely and 1 is not likely. Would you recommend us to other people? And we're constantly getting sort of high scores. But for 60% of customers, we don't get that through word of mouth. So we predominantly use Spare Room. And there's a couple of things that people who use Spare Room might not know, like the internal workings. So in order to really capitalize on Spare Room, and we talk about this in the book that we're publishing next month, you need to be refreshing your Spare Room ad very frequently. So we do it 7 times a day, right the way from 8 o'clock in the morning, which is sort of capturing people getting up and going to work, right the way to 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night, capturing people who are off to do their night shifts. The other times is sort of mid-morning as people are on their break, lunchtime, mid-afternoon as people are having their afternoon break, then around about 5 o'clock, 5:30 as they're on their way home. We have what we call the Corrie effect, so sort of around about 7:30, 8 o'clock as people are sitting down to watch Corrie, we ping it out again. That means that we're constantly refreshing. Now, you can do this more frequently on your mobile phone than you can on the app. You can only do it once an hour on the app. So make sure that you're refreshing your ads every periodically on the phone. And that means that your advert appears on the first page, because when we go and Google something, how often do we go and actually look at page 2? Very rarely. And it's the same for, in my view, for Spare Room. So the second thing that we do in terms of getting our customers is that we track very closely how many viewings it takes us to secure a sale. And at the moment, it's 1 in 3. It was 1 in 2, but it's extended out to 1 in 3 because I think people are wanting to look around and shop around. And at the moment, it's a buyer's market, because there's lots of choice out there. So one of the things that we do to disrupt that is, if we find out that they're going on from us to do another viewing, and we know that their viewing is at, say, 2 o'clock, around about 2:15, we'll send out a little text to them saying, "Hi, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming to see us. We know that you love the room. If there's anything we can do, if there's any questions you have, please feel free to contact us." Now, you might sort of think, well, isn't that a little bit sneaky? Because they might be going off to see Tony's room next. But at the end of the day, I'm sort of saying, well, I need to try and get mind space. I need to try and be in front of the customer as much as I possibly can without harassing them. And so these little sort of tips and tricks have really helped us to sort of increase our average viewings to sale ratio. And it means that you're providing that service to the customer. So that's how we're doing it. We've not used Open Rent, although we're about to try that for the first time. I know other people's had a lot of success. But if you're in London, there are lots of other apps that you can use. And I think it's episode 11 on the podcast where we talk about advertising and marketing your room. So if you want to go and check out the podcast, there's a whole half an hour section where Matt in particular is sharing his experiences of using these apps in London, which, I mean, if you think Northampton and Bedford are competitive, London is like the shark pit.
That's a good point.
Just come back in there as well.
Certainly, Tony, please do.
Just going on to what Steve said, you're advertising against other rooms, other landlords. So your photos have got to be 100% perfect. That is your shop window into your room. Unless you've got quality photos, you're not going to get people come quality tenants. So just make sure you put up good quality photos on Spare Rooms.
Yeah,
and a good photographer.
There's a great photographer, Tony Dan Photography. He's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you've not already connected with Tony, I suggest you do. He actually goes under Anthony Dand on Facebook, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, but he's an awesome photographer. A couple of other questions that have come forward here while we've been going through that, and I'll put this one to you, Ken, because I've seen your latest HMO, and your latest HMO's got really, really large rooms. And Nina's saying, how about marketing larger rooms as a living stroke office space to customers?
But yeah, you would need to do your homework. Does the area and the people in the house require that kind of space? I know most of my customers would much rather have, you know, a larger bedroom, however you want to set it up with whatever furniture, because they like the idea of having their own space and, you know, being able to, you know, stretch their arms without touching each of the walls, you know, those kind of things. So yeah, everything is possible, providing of course it's the right market for it.
Okay, no, great answer, great answer. And this is a different question which I'll pose to you as well from Rex, and it's specifically about what you mentioned. How is it possible to convert a 3-bedroom home to a 6-bedroom HMO? Did you have to hire an architect to do a space plan or something?
Actually, it was an 8-bed HMO. But
so a 3-bed to an 8-bed.
Yeah. That particular property had one very large open extension on the back of it. It had at one stage been an office, you know, and had, you know, the old property had been used as office space, and this extension had been built, and you could see there was a little metal flaps in the floor for where people plugged in their, you know, their laptops and, you know, those kind of things. So out of that space, we built 4 ensuite bedrooms. And then the rest of the house has the other 4 bedrooms. So that's how we were able to achieve it in that one.
Perfect. So it's through the fact that although it says 3-bed, it was actually an incredibly large property with a large extension.
Yeah, we aren't actually making people sleep in pods and stacking them vertically. You know, it's not like that. They are proper bedrooms and ensuite.
So they're not bunk beds and...
No.
Well, just some quick feedback for the panel here. David Clouter said there's been some terrific information in tonight's event. Huge thanks to everyone. Irma is saying, wow, Steve, you're a walking HMO library indeed. There's comments from Sam saying, thank you, Steve, very much appreciated. Kathy, spare room, she's a fan. By the way, when it goes blue, you can renew. So that sounds a bit rhyming there, doesn't it? Got a question here from Anil, which is the panel aware of any mortgage changes relating to HMOs at the moment? I mean, Kim, you've had a few tribulations getting your bridge over the line, but with regard to commercial mortgages for HMOs, has anybody any experience that's recent?
I think the most important thing is get a good mortgage broker. They know the market and they'll find the deals for you. I know we've got Nick who comes to our meetings, Nick Hope from Hope Property. So speak to a really good specialised mortgage lender.
Yeah. And Steve, you were about to say?
Yeah, Tony's absolutely right. You've got to, first step is you've got to get yourself a really good broker who understands the HMO market. But I talk with our broker every Friday morning, and one of the One of the things that he's come back with recently that he's seeing from valuations is that, particularly if you're going to go down the commercial valuation, is that valuers are now really looking at rents received. So they're actually starting to not necessarily downvalue the property, but they're now downvaluing the rents because they're foreseeing potential issues as with the end of the job retention scheme. So they're kind of protecting themselves. And one of the things that they're really focusing on is this rent. Now, we've got a couple of guys that we're working with who are doing projects, and even with signed ASTs, they're still downvaluing the rents to what the market average is, as opposed to what you might get. Now, obviously, you can go back and challenge, but that's one thing to be mindful of. And it comes back to that whole sort of due diligence when you're looking at projects. So one of the things that we do as part of our due diligence on a deal is that we are increasing the interest up to 6%. David actually advised that it shouldn't be 6%, but it should be 8%. We're starting to look at 8% on an interest stress test, but also we're looking at reducing our rents by 10 to 15% just to see what happens to the deal in terms of its viability and also its cash flow. Now, for the larger properties, I don't think that will be an issue. If you're going from, like, I don't know, I'm going to make these numbers up, £2,000 a month down to £1,800 a month, it's not so much of a deal. But if you're going on maybe smaller properties, whereby you might be going from, I don't know, £700 down to sort of sub 500, then I would kind of argue that you're in buy-to-let territory. And why would you go for the extra hassle on an HMO when you're sort of getting top-end buy-to-let returns? So just be mindful when you are looking at opportunities to make sure that you stress test the interest rate, but also start to look at stress testing your rents just to see what that does. And by adopting those two sort of risk mitigation strategies, you can then make more of an informed decision as to whether the project is going to fit your investment criteria.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, there was a communication last week from the banks with regards to affordability testing, and what the line that they've effectively given is along the lines of valuers should be more cautious and prudent on valuing the income streams and factor in an element of redundancy or non-payment going forwards. And therefore your historic records that you're mentioning there are likely to be requested to demonstrate whether you had tenants non-paying during lockdown, for example, and that will be a factor they'll consider. So good point. I mean, Nina said that she uses an experienced surveyor in HMOs. She's just done one. She hasn't actually said if it was successful or not. And Football Fun, I'm not sure who Football Fun is, but that's a great YouTube name. He's a chartered surveyor and owns a HMO, which he designed himself. So thank you for joining us, Football Fun, on that. I think we're coming to the end of the evening, because I said we'd aim to sort of wrap it around 8:30 plus or minus a few minutes, and we've gone about 15 minutes over today. So I'd like to thank our esteemed panel, Steve Mitchell, Tony Dand and Kim Hendle. You've given some phenomenal content tonight, and what a great discussion it's been with regards to the topic of HMOs and the future of them and how they're changing and the impacts of pre and post COVID. So if I can ask the audience to drop a comment in the box and thank our panel. I've just seen Nina's dropped in. She's also a surveyor as well. So it seems to me there's quite a few surveyors on tonight's HMO panel, HMO audience, sorry. And all that reminds me to say to everybody is, I forgot to say it earlier, Shaz Nawaz, who's a great friend and written this book, has has messaged me and said, if anybody orders this before midnight on Thursday, then he'll give them a load of free bonuses as well. And it is a fantastic book. I've nearly read 2/3 of it, so I would highly recommend it as a book. If you haven't got it, it'll max out your bottom line significantly. We've got loads of comments coming through, guys. Great content from all the providers, from Anil. Steve is, thank you everyone, brilliant evening. So any last parting words of wisdom from our panel before we say goodbye to the audience? Steve?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for having me on the Great Property Meet. It's been really interesting. I think my sort of parting words of wisdom is that I think HMOs are here to stay. I think it's going to get more competitive. And therefore, if you're investing in HMOs, you've got to make sure that you do your due diligence. Due diligence is the key to getting the right returns from that investment. And as I think Tony and Kim have sort of testified, making sure that you look after your customers going forward is also going to be a key criteria. So if you get the deal right, you get the product right, and you look after your customers, you can't really go far wrong.
I think that is absolutely brilliant advice, Steve. Tony, do you have any pearls of wisdom? Because you always have a brilliant pearl of wisdom. Anything you'd like to share tonight?
All I'd say is if you're thinking of getting into HMOs, education, learn as much as you can, watch videos like this, read the books, talk to people who do it, talk to Steve, talk to people who know what they're doing, because it's sold as an easy way to make money. It's not. It's an easy way to lose money unless you know what you're doing.
I couldn't agree more with you. And also to sort of add on to that, Steve is a HMO mentor, and you know, I'd recommend connecting up with Steve as well if you want some personal mentoring. Kim, any parting words of wisdom from you?
All I would suggest to people is if they're interested in HMOs, then you know, do the due diligence, do everything else, but do it. You know, there is, and also make sure that you use the resources around you, like you know, groups such as this, and the people in the property community, which, as Steve mentioned earlier, you know, some of the most giving people I've ever come across. Most people can't believe how happy other people are to partake, you know, give away information, support, go round to people like Steve came round to our HMO to have a look, to give us some ideas, make sure that we understood what we were getting into, give us words of advice. He even gave us his tradespeople, for goodness sakes, you know, when we needed them. So, you know, people are out there and we are here to support everybody. So, you know, don't be afraid to ask.
No, and that's the thing you will find with the property industry is people will gladly and willingly share their knowledge, their time, their input. I mean, all that remains for me to say is we had a brilliant website resource here from Steve, which I'd recommend if you haven't subscribed to his HMO podcast or downloaded some of his guides, I'd certainly recommend that. In addition to that, oops, if I can just stop that share there, I'd also recommend having a look at this. Whoops, I will get my mouse fingers correct in a second. I'd recommend getting connected onto the Great Property Meet YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon to be alerted when we release new videos. And there's nearly 200 videos there for you to enjoy, and it's all free education from great people. Tony Dan's got videos up there. Kim is just about to record some videos on that. I'm sure we'll get some input from Steve on there, David Clouter, who's a regular contributor, Paul Higgs on property development, Linda Wright on planning. So there's all sorts of content from all sorts of experts, and it's all free for you to access. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been a great evening. It's been lovely to have you join us, and the feedback that's coming in to everybody is well done. Something different, something brilliant. Thanks again. Loads of comments. It's been interesting content. So thank you as a panel. You have been brilliant. And thank you as an audience. You've been very engaging and certainly picked their brains on a lot of topics. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.